Learning outcomes. After studying this module, you shall be able to 1. Know about the need for private participation in infrastructure projects, learn about the process of bidding, design, structures and procedures, identify how are the infrastructure projects awarded, analyze about the importance of competition in infrastructure projects. Introduction. Recent decades have witnessed a dramatic transformation in approach to the infrastructure sector, wherein private provision of these services is now generally acknowledged to be more efficient, both from the investment as well as the operation point of view. Infrastructure sectors are increasingly thought of in terms of activities and services rather than the monolithic natural monopolies of earlier times or of yore. It is now recognized that distinct activities within these sectors may be amenable to competitive growth. There still remains, however, segments where economic and or technological characteristics render competition infeasible and hinder contestability for these markets. Efficiency in these activities require competition for the right to provide services. These segments, moreover, are characterized by large investment, long gestation periods, and risk profiles that are typical of infrastructure projects in general. The procedures to award concessions for these services must be designed so as to ensure successful implementation. Transparency in the award of these projects is crucial. Transparency refers to the decision-making process itself, be it based on a financial bid or other selection criteria. Rules and procedure for selection are fixed in advance and apply equally to all participants. Competitive bidding is the most efficient means of awarding the right to provide infrastructure service to the user in the most cost-effective manner. Similar arguments will also apply to existing assets and services in the infrastructure sectors from public ownership to private. The need for private participation in infrastructure projects. The objective of inviting private investment into infrastructure services should primarily be to increase investment and operational efficiencies in the provision of these services, although maximizing revenue can be considered an important secondary objective in some cases. The incentive structure to provide more efficient services is more pronounced and robust for the private sector than in the public sector. This is generally true, however, only when the service provider operates in the environment where more efficient providers can contest for the market. Competition is already a reality in many segments like power generation and supply, telecom, airports, ports, roads, and urban transport. Awarding rights. Infrastructure concession contracts set out the rights and performance obligation of concessionaires and the risks and incentive framework within which they operate, including pricing arrangements. A concession contract must strike a balance between being credible, thus providing potential investors with the security that they will not be expropriated of their investment in the future, and being flexible by allowing the concession to be modified if new and unexpected circumstances arise. The clarity with which these terms can be defined determines whether there is likely to be renegotiation later on, which may undermine the significance of the initial award. The design of incentives and risk allocation will affect first the intensity of competition and then the sustainability of the original contract. The concession contract document is critical to the successful implementation of the project. The nature of the service to which the rights of provision are being sold, including the associated market structure and institutions, the policy environment, and the rights and responsibility of the winning bidder, enables proper identification and allocation of these risks to the entity best able to bear it. This allocation is at the core of concession design and hence the bidding process. Competition for the market can yield rents. Market structure. Replicating competitive forces and hence getting the best deal for consumers and taxpayers in infrastructure markets and sectors that are not contestable requires, first, allocating the right to provide services in these segments to those entities that are best suited to do so most effectively, and second, regulating the performance of these entities in a manner that is consistent with the efficiency gains that normally result from competition. The market structure of the sector in which the service is to be provided is therefore critical to understanding the risks associated with the provision of the service and hence the design of the bidding process. Regulatory environment and incentive mechanism. Regulation is tied in with the market structure. Competitive markets such as power generation generally need only light regulation. Markets with natural monopoly characteristic need independent regulation. Effective regulation, especially for emerging economies, is expensive. The cost of data gathering and analysis can be prohibitive, sometimes of the order of 5% or more of the revenues of that sector. Economic regulation also has to monitor and evaluate performance and deal with dispute resolution. A well-designed bidding mechanism and hence concession contract has inbuilt incentives for efficiency and cost control so that only light-handed regulation is required. Risk allocation and mitigation. Differing forms of private participation reflect varying risk-sharing arrangements between the investors, consumers, and the government. At the cost of elaborating a point mentioned above, the risks of a project are predominantly a function of the market structure and the nature of the service that the project offers. This can be broadly classified as design, finance, construction, operation, market and commercial, policy, political and regulatory, and force majeure. In some cases, private investors operate projects but do not own them, such as management concessions prevalent in the water sector. In others, private parties take on only the operating and collection risks. In one of the most prevalent forms of risk sharing, they also take on investment and financing risks. In the initial stages of private initiative in infrastructure, many governments attempted to mitigate commercial risks through various forms of guarantees, including long-term take or pay contracts and power purchase agreement or PPAs, traffic guarantees for road projects, and so on. Although many of these contracts are negotiated, these mechanisms were designed to have the contractor's profitability depending largely on his own cost structure. Design of the concession structure. The optimal length of the concession is yet another decision factor. If significant capital investment is required, then the contract has to be for a period sufficient for the concessionaire to recover his capital cost. The termination and renegotiation of the concession should be formulated in a manner that minimizes the incentive or disincentive for the concessionaire to lower investment. Performance clauses in the contract have to specify minimum standards that the asset has to meet. The process of bidding, design, structures and procedures. Ways of awarding concessions or transferring asset ownership. Together with light-handed regulatory monitoring, competition for the right to provide services in the sector can be generated through a bidding process. Many emerging countries now use competitive bidding to avoid concessions for infrastructure projects to private firms in sectors such as water, waste disposal, transport, and power distribution. In India, until the year 2000, rights to provide various infrastructure services, including concessions, were usually awarded through negotiated or administrative mechanism, including the Memorandum of Understanding or the MOU. While these may have had the advantage of speed and avoided the costs normally associated with preparing for the bidding process, the biggest drawback was a lack of transparency. Inadequate information about opportunity cost of the funds being invested in the project that was being concessioned more often than not resulted in suboptimal use and encouraged lobbying for the concession and default and renegotiation later. It may be argued that there was no alternative to awarding some projects, though through a negotiated route. It is a debatable point that the outcome in these would have been more efficient through competitive bidding. Had a thorough project analysis been conducted beforehand, or bidding procedures thoughtfully designed, it is likely that the difficulties faced in many of these would have been obviated or at least considerably mitigated. Designing the bidding mechanism. The first amongst these is discover the true market value. The bidding process should result in prices of concessions that reflect their true market value and can, at arm's length, provide underlying valuation of the benefits, costs, risks associated with the contract. Related to this is the notion of economic efficiency, which is established when the concessions are held by those who value them the most, an outcome that arises endogenously from the bidding process. Second, provide transparent assignment. The process of assigning concessions to winning bidders is conducted in an open and transparent manner that assures all participants of equal treatment. Such a transparent process encourages participation by reducing bidders' uncertainty and simplifies regulatory oversight of the assignment process. Third, mitigate market power. An optimal bidding design addresses the objective of mitigating market power and promoting competition by imposing restrictions on the amount and type of capacity that each bidder may hold. This results in better price signals for the concessions that accurately reflect real resource benefits and cost. Fourth, optimize bidding proceeds. The bidding process optimizes bidding revenues, especially in the case where a scarce resource is being allocated. Positive proceeds can be transferred to consumers and negative proceeds recovered through levies on consumers. Fifth, trade-offs among the objectives. The bidding design problem is somewhat complicated because the objectives above are often not perfectly consistent with one another. One objective may not be achieved fully without sacrificing the complete attainment of another objective. Two objectives that involve an explicit trade-off are mitigating market power and optimizing the bidding proceeds. Sixth, bidding formats. There are two broad formats for bidding, sealed and open. If there is a group of similar concessions or licenses being awarded, there are two sub-possibilities for open bidding, sequential or simultaneous. A sealed bid award could be a single step, one based on combined technical and financial criteria, or it could be a two-step process with an initial technical pre-qualifying round and a second financial one. The concessions may be awarded based on either the highest price or the second highest one. A simultaneous bidding procedure could be conducted in a single round or over multiple rounds. Most infrastructure concessions have hitherto been awarded through a two-step first price sealed bids. Seventh, common value versus private value. The design of the process of awarding the rights to the concessionaire will depend on the valuation that is placed on the concession. In many concessions, the bidder's valuation of the rights to the concession will depend not just on their own competence but also on other factors that will affect all bidders. For example, the willingness to pay of consumers or the future behavior of regulators. Each bidder will have access to different areas of a common information set and a different valuation metric. Cases where the value depends on factors that affect all bidders are called common value bids. Cases where the bid value depends on only the characteristic of the bidder or on factors that are within the bidder's control are private value bids. Most infrastructure concessions to build, manage and operate projects as opposed to construction contracts are intrinsically common value. They can be made to resemble private value bids through mitigation of commercial risks to the extent possible. Eighth, congruence of formats with objectives of competitive bidding. In weighing the advantages and disadvantages of the alternative bidding formats, their congruence with the nature of the valuation of the concession is the primary yardstick. First, wherever appropriate, the bidding process should allow bidders to form their preferred aggregation of services. It is very difficult for one-shot sealed bids, sequential bidding, and two-step processes to provide sufficient flexibility to bidders to accomplish this. Second, these formats generally do not address the winner's curse problem as well as alternative formats do. There is little, if any, objective contemporaneous price revelation of bids for related items, much less the opportunity for bidders to respond. Third, bidders are unlikely to bid as aggressively in these less transparent formats, and the outcome may be characterized by distorted market values, reduced revenues, inefficient outcomes, and different winning prices for similar concessions. Moreover, regulators and the public generally prefer more transparency rather than less. Ninth, well-informed discovery of market values. The simple average approximation SAA is the format most likely to result in prices that reflect their fundamental market values and avoid the pricing errors associated with the winner's curse and guesses that bidders must make in most other design. It allows bidders to observe and respond to prices as they emerge, which improves the accuracy of their forecast and improves the efficiency of outcomes. Moreover, the rules of the SAA ensure that similar prices are established for similar concession. Any process that establishes a uniform price for each type of services allows large buyers to exercise some market power, undermining the efficiency of the outcome. However, within the class of standard formats that do set a uniform price, the SAA maximizes efficiency by minimizing bidder error. 10th, transparency. The SAA is open and transparent. Its rules are both objective and stated in advance. The process of bidding provides a public record of the competition among competing buyers, a record that is open to inspection at each round of the bidding process. Regulators and other interested parties will insist that the process allows all bidders to compete on an equal basis. 11th, mitigating market power and promoting competition. Market power is addressed in the bidding design primarily in terms of ownership and cross-holding restrictions. The rules specify restrictions regarding which bidders can bid on which concessions. The SAA is conducive to those types of restrictions while achieving the objectives because the complete rules are well specified ahead of time. The SAA provides bidders maximum flexibility subject to those restrictions to acquire their desired contracts as prices evolve through the bidding, while at the same time the bidding outcome can be audited. 12th, revenue optimization. The SAA is designed to minimize the effects of the winner's curse. The open, transparent bidding process of the SAA provides valuable information to bidders, which instills in them a level of confidence in their bidding not found in many other auction formats. The bidding information available to bidders in the SAA reduces the need for them to bid conservatively and shade their bids. That is, it mitigates the winner's curse problem. This leads to higher winning prices, greater revenue than other formats that lack transparency and bidding information which is provided in the SAA. Clarity in design of bidding process. To encourage efficient performance and to minimize post-award renegotiation, it is crucial to consistently and comprehensively define performance specifications and the parameters of incentives and risk sharing. A characteristic of most infrastructure concession is that there are only a limited number of players globally and even fewer that are likely to participate. Collusion among bidders is difficult to preempt and requires exhaustive project preparation. Bidding parameters. Bidding parameters relate to the design of incentive mechanism and will vary according to the nature or the market structure of the industry, of the asset or service that is being sold or concessioned. When an asset, for example a power plant, including an intangible one like the spectrum, is being sold, the parameter typically is the value of the asset. In bids for infrastructure service concessions in sectors like roads, ports, water supply or sewage disposal, the parameters usually are that the lowest tariff has to be charged to the consumers, the lowest subsidy that the government must provide to offer a commercially viable service, the shortest duration of the concession, the lowest cost to the government for constructing or operating service of facilities, the lowest income guarantee requested from the state, the largest amount of new investment to be undertaken by the operator, the highest revenue offered to the state for existing infrastructure, either a share or a flat offer, the lowest present value of future revenue streams. Bidding on the shortest duration for the concession given a predetermined tariff rate is generally considered to be exceedingly prone to renegotiation and is rarely used as an award. A feature of most forms of concession bidding, therefore, is that the duration of the contract is pre-specified by the government. Some mechanism gave the concession holder the option of extending the franchise for an additional fixed term at the end of the original term. The problems associated with fixed term franchises apply to this form as well. The primary defect with fixed term concession is that they create unnecessary risk for the concession holder. Since demand is uncertain and competitive bidding results in ex-ante rents being extracted away, the winner faces significant losses if demand projections are over-optimistic. While bidding on the direct user charge, which is the most common, there are other possibilities. Telecom licenses in India in the past were assigned both on bids submitted on license fees in the case of cellular mobile services and on the lowest price that would be charged to the consumer given a fixed level of license fees which is being determined by the government. Concession offers can similarly require bidders to bid on license or entry fees with a fixed revenue share. Bidding on multiple parameters. Bidding for concessions can also be based on a combination of parameters. Bidding parameters might include payment of a share of revenues from toll collection to the conceding authority or a combination of a flat fee and revenue share. It is generally agreed, however, that bidding on a concession with more than 3 parameters usually defeats the purpose of maximizing multiple goals by making the outcome too complex and introduces administrative arbitrariness and inevitable renegotiation. Summary. As a rule, concession awards should be made through competitive bidding unless there are overwhelming reasons to do otherwise, such as excessive transaction cost for the size of the contract or very special circumstances where speed or innovation compulsions exist. Second, a lot of attention should be paid to the market structure in which the concession will operate. This will enable a comprehensive identification of the risks involved. Third, the design of a concession contract should reflect appropriate allocation of risks. This will determine the commercial viability and success of the project. Detailing the rights of all parties involved in the contract will reduce the possibility of eventual renegotiation. Fourth, the objective of the award should be the allocation to the party that can provide the services most efficiently to the final user. Revenue generation for the taxpayer should be a secondary objective. In case of a conflict between the two objectives, efficiency of service provision should be the priority. If the service to be provided is such that the concessionaire has control over the factors for successful implementation of the project, a sealed bid method in the bidding process should be used. For services where the cost to the concessionaire depends on exogenous factors as well, open bidding is more suitable. Simultaneous bidding is more appropriate for cases where concessions for many similar services are being awarded, or when the concession is part of a network where the valuation of the concession will depend on forward and backward linkages. Competitive bidding produces the most efficient outcomes if there are sufficient number of bidders. Keeping the process simple and eschewing onerous pre-qualification norms for bidders ensures this. Simplicity in the selection of bid parameters and the bidding process is paramount. If multi-parameter bidding is necessary, there should not be more than 3 parameters.